I go where there's real problems at, where people are getting killed. I can get killed. I don't got a bulletproof vest. I don't carry a gun, but I still go in these places 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning. You know why? Because the sick, the elderly, the kids, and everybody else need help.
It has been a violent weekend in New York City. More than a dozen people were shot. 8 shootings in 4 boroughs.
14 shootings just yesterday with 18 victims.
7 people were injured in 3 separate shootings, all within 4 minutes of one another. The shooting broke out just before 1 a.m. at the corner of Livonia and Watkins in Brownsville, Brooklyn.
A shooting in Brownsville, Brooklyn.
3 people have been shot in Brownsville, Brooklyn this morning.
Crime in New York City has been on the decline for decades. But in early summer, as the city cautiously emerged from months of COVID-19 lockdown, a surge in gun violence began. According to the NYPD, as of November, there have been 1,331 shootings in 2020. In 2019, that number was 685. The number of shooting victims has gone up as well. So far, there have been 1,635 victims of gun violence, as compared to 812 in 2019. In Brownsville, one of the neighborhoods hit hardest by the pandemic, murders and shootings are more than double of 2019. So what's going on in Brownsville? And is the situation as bad as they say it is? I asked entrepreneur, community board member, and Brownsville born and raised Anita Pierce.
When you read the newspapers, you would think that Brownsville is hot all the time in terms of violence. Okay, so let's be real, it does happen. It's not like we're sitting in the middle of a war zone, right? Where, we can't go outside, where we can't experience life. Those things do exist, but it's not every day. And it's frustrating to me, when people are constantly, making a statement to say, Brownsville is this. There are pockets of stuff, right? But I promise you it's not every day.
Brownsville's 73rd Precinct reported that violent shootings went up from 30 in 2019 to 85 as of November 2020. The number of shooting victims has gone up from 48 to 105. That's a 183% increase in shooting incidents and almost 119% increase in shooting victims.
Do you think that Brownsville actually does have a higher level of gun violence than other communities around Brooklyn?
The data says we do. We absolutely do. But we're the last to get the resources, right? So let's talk about it. When you're scrambling for resources, you will have more violence.
Brownsville native Kamara Jackson is the founder and CEO of Elite Learners, a youth empowerment and anti-violence community organization. She believes that the economic hardships caused by COVID-19 in a community that was already struggling could be a major cause of the rise in gun violence.
When the pandemic initially hit, violence numbers dropped because individuals were inside, right? We were quarantined. They weren't really out on the street. But as we started to open up, our violence numbers started to hit the highest that they've ever been. And that was just as a result of the temperament that people are on as a result of the pandemic. So we had people that could not get on unemployment, people that lost their jobs. We have individuals that were released from prison with no resources, right? So here we are, we're saying, okay, we're going to let you out because of a pandemic, but we're gonna provide very little support for you to become successful. All that creates chaos. Chaos in families lead to chaos in communities. A hungry person can become a violent person.
Lost jobs, lack of resources, hunger. On top of these, criminologists also attribute the rise in shootings to pandemic-induced cabin fever and the advent of summer, traditionally high crime season. The New York Police Department, however, has blamed a recent bail reform law, which limits a judge's ability to keep people in jail pre-trial. They also connect the rise in gun violence to the emergency release of incarcerated people in order to curb the spread of coronavirus. The Black Lives Matter protest and calls to defund the police, they say, led to the disbanding of the NYPD's anti-crime plainclothes unit, which meant less policing and more shootings.
Rhetoric of defund the police, get rid of the police, abolish the police, that's got to end.
You know, we need three things. I'm going to keep repeating it for people. We need support. We need laws that help the police instead of handcuff them. And then we need resources.
They've blamed the shutdown in the courts. They've blamed the bail law. They've blamed just the prosecutors. I mean, it's like, pick a reason and they've blamed it. But where they faltered is providing the evidence.
Anyone who's out there surmising what kind of impact the pandemic has had on violence is just doing no more than surmising. And if they're coming up with very firm conclusions that the pandemic means that there's more violence, means we should be giving more money to police, and it's especially coming from, that message is coming from the police, we should be really wary of any assumptions that are being drawn.
Scott Heckinger is a public defender and the former director of policy for Brooklyn Defender Services. Today, he's the founder and director of Zealous, a national advocacy group of public defenders working towards ending mass incarceration.
Police are the reason why there is more crime, so-called crime, in these neighborhoods, and more violence. Characteristics that drive violence: isolation, shame, economic deprivation, and violence itself are the primary consequences of over-policing in communities. It makes communities feel isolated, makes people feel ashamed. It takes away resources that otherwise would be spent on poverty alleviation, and being handcuffed, even if you ultimately don't get arrested, being stopped and frisked unconstitutionally, being shot by police is obviously a form of violence itself.
Police officers, there's very little engagement. There's a lot of patrolling, right? There's a lot of looking, and there's very little interaction. In our community, at the state that it's in now, we need engagement. We need interaction. We need people to know how we're feeling and how's our day going, and we need, to have support systems around. And that's what the Cure Violence organizations provide. It's a big support system for communities.
Cure Violence programs take a public health approach to reducing violence by training credible insiders to be what are known as violence interrupters, usually former gang members who draw from their own experiences. Their job is to engage with young people and then identify and mediate potential conflicts before they turn violent.
I want to show the black young male and also the black young lady what a black male can be, even when you go through all that. Despite me going through all that I've been through, prison, being shot, shooting people, being arrested for murders, being accused of murders, being in prison, going to war, being in solitary confinement, doing almost 35 years in prison, and all this, total, all this violence that I've been through. I'm showing them that despite I've been through that, I didn't break, that you can change. You can change your ways. You can change everything about you, despite what you go through. You don't have to give up.
Anthony Green is a violence interrupter who's prevented hundreds of shootings that could have led to people getting killed, injured, or ending up in prison.
Just the other day, I was fortunate enough to get some young guys jobs. Do you know how good I feel? Seriously, even my cousin's son, I got him a job. Do you know how good I feel just doing that? I got another young black man a job. That's action. Instead of worry about what his problem is, I wouldn't solve the problem.
Over the last 5 years, we spent $300 million, we, New York City residents, taxpayers, to settle NYPD lawsuits for abuse and violence. $300 million. For that same amount of money, we could fund proven violence interruption programs in every city in New York City for the next 10 years. And on top of that, have left over to fund summer youth employment for the next 10 years. So on one hand, we have policing that we know makes people feel trapped in their own communities, that we know leads to violence, that we know doesn't help public health issues, that we know doesn't help prevent shootings. Look at the statistics that we're looking at right now. We know from violence, and then you look at violence interruption programs, which are community-based, which have trust, which work with people on both sides of conflict to try to resolve conflict. So it's not just preventing a shooting or preventing violence in the short term, but creating more peaceful communities in the long term, and also focus on things like job training and education and health.
The community members are more likely to listen to someone that looks like them, comes from where they come from, and really walk the normal roads of life. And that looks 9 times better than having 40 police officers on one corner. You know, our young people are already naturally afraid, and they have a guard up when it comes to officers.
What is the relationship like being a violence interrupter versus working with the police?
I just want something clear. We don't work with the police at all. A violence interrupter is here for the people of the community, whatever community that you're in. I'm not getting involved with your police work, and I'm not here to assist you. My concern is my community, to keep them from hurting each other, killing each other, robbing each other, or whatever the case may be. Whatever y'all do, that's on them. I'm from this area, and this area has always been violent, unfortunately. You can say poverty, you can use the drugs, you can use all that. But let's not get it twisted. We can't bring guns and drugs here. However, if you don't have jobs and you don't have ways and means and resources to do things, what will you result in?
Our kids are hungry, they're starving, and they're starving for success. They want to make it out of Brownsville. They want to tell a different narrative. And that's what we're here to encourage them to do.
We are mothers, we're fathers, we're community members. We don't want violence. We don't want to be hurt. We don't want people to be shot.
Never ran, never will. Yeah, that still exists. However, you know, when you're thinking about, you know, what you can't Google is the heart and soul of the community residents that live here and want to remain here. The new Brownsville is one where we are aiming to create an environment where everyone is like happy, whole. One where, you know, when I think about where we're sitting, that my daughter comes and plays and there isn't any issues or concern. It's peaceful, it's quiet, you can sit and be able to enjoy, you know, just actually sitting in a park and enjoying it.